community garden. When I read that sentence this morning, I said to myself, I've been on trains. After it starts moving, they tell me where the train's going. So, or it'll be in a new class and they'll say, if this isn't where you're supposed to be, but stay if you're not, because this is welcome to starting a community garden. We have a large attendance today. Many folks throughout the state of Illinois are joining to learn together. We've also got quite a few from other Midwest surrounding states. And quite interesting, we have someone registered from the Czech Republic. So it's obvious to me that there's a lot of interest in community gardens and gardening in general. So we appreciate that you're attending today. So the way we'll go today, our presenter today is going to be Dr. Lori George. She's a University of Illinois educator for small farms, local foods. She might share a little more about what she does throughout her presentation. But so Lori's going to present to us the how-tos about local community gardens. And after Lori delivers her program, we will transition into having Rick Walfelt, an Illinois Master Gardener and Extension Program Coordinator, Gail DeVilbus, which is myself, share some insights on some raised bed gardening and maybe how to build some gardens and the methods to create some raised beds. So I've mentioned this several times, but feel free to type in any questions in the chat box and we'll address them after the presentation. So we're very glad you're here. And with that, I'll turn that over to Lori.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Gail. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. I think everybody here is looking to start a community garden or help promote or keep your garden sustainable and viable, because that's one of the hardest things to do for a community garden. So we'll talk about some of these issues as we progress through the presentation. So first off, what I want to do is, what is a community garden? So a sustainable community food system, such as a community garden, that's defined by the University of California Sustainable Ag and Research Program, is a collaborative network that integrates sustainable food production, processing, distribution, consumption, and waste management in order to enhance the environmental, economic, and social health of a particular place. The food systems include all processes involved in keeping us fed, such as the growing and the harvesting, the processing, transporting, marketing, all of that. And this system is influenced basically by social, political, economic, and natural environments. All of it is dependent on human resources for labor, research, and education. When you talk with kids today, and they don't know where their food comes from, where it was grown, and how it was produced, community gardens can try and help with that. So what is a community garden? Generally, it's going to be located in neighborhoods and schools. A lot of school gardens can be community gardens as well. Public housing is a great place to start a community garden if you're interested. There's a lot of people there that can benefit from a garden and learn how to learn the gardening techniques. Hospitals can use it to help promote fresh and vegetables and fruits and improve the eating habits of their patients. Nursing homes, the same way. Nursing homes can use community gardens as a horticultural therapy garden. We'll talk about that in a minute. A lot of churches can do it for their parishioners, as well as for the community that surrounds their church, as well as senior centers. So there are two main reasons why community food production systems are important. The first is food insecurity. The definition of food insecurity from Feeding America is the household's inability to provide enough food for every person in the household to have an active, healthy life. Food insecurity is one way to measure the risk of hunger, but it's also important to note that food insecurity is a household situation, not an individual situation. While food insecurity affects everyone in a household, it may affect them differently. For example, parents or caregivers may go without eating meals to ensure that their children are getting enough food. Security may rise because families need to make choices between buying food or pay for the electricity or the medicine, house payments, or the gas in the car in order for them to get to work. In 2019, according to the USDA, 6.5% of US households with children which is approximately about 2.4 million households, were food insecure. There was no difference between these numbers in 2019 and the numbers from the statistical data in 2018. In this context, food insecurity was defined as families being unable at times to provide adequate nutritious food for their kids. In the state of Illinois, 1 in 10 people struggle with hunger. In 2019, it was 1 in 8. And in Illinois, 1 in 8 children currently struggle with hunger. And in 2019, it was 1 in 6. So before COVID, food insecurity in the United States was the lowest it had been in over 20 years. Even then, 35.2 million people were food insecure. Today, with the COVID concerns that we have, many more are experiencing food insecurity due to illness, loss of a job, cancellation of school lunches, etc. On October of 2020, Feeding America posted an article discussing the 2020 overall food insecurity rate for the United States. According to the website, the projected values for 22 states is between 24 and 30%, with one state being 31% or greater. The link shown at the bottom takes you to the website and the map that can be used to focus in on your specific state. By doing so, I was able to focus in on Illinois and found that Illinois rate projections for food insecurity went from 10.1% to 14.7%. These values, remember, are just projections, but it can give you an indication of how COVID-19 may be affecting your local communities. The second reason why community food production systems, such as community gardens, are important is because of food deserts areas. Food deserts are defined as areas of the country lacking fresh fruits and vegetables and other healthful whole foods, usually found in impoverished areas. This is largely due to a lack of grocery stores, farmers markets, and healthy food providers. The USDA Economic Research Service conducted a study in 2012 looking at the characteristics and influential factors of food deserts. Some of these indicators can be defined as a lack of accessibility to healthy food, as measured by distance to a store or by the number of stores in that area. And specifically, they were looking with it from a half mile or a mile to the nearest store from their communities. Another one is individual level resources that may affect accessibility, such as family, income, or vehicle availability. Neighborhood level indicators of resources, such as the average income of the neighborhood and the availability of public transportation. Neighborhoods may only have quick marts or gas stations that are stacked with convenient, processed, high sugar, and high fat food items instead of fresh fruits and vegetables. The study also found that areas with higher poverty levels are more likely to be food deserts, and that the association with food desert status, this can vary across very dense urban areas, less dense urban areas, and rural areas. The areas with higher poverty rates are more likely to be food deserts, regardless whether it's rural or urban. And that in all but very dense urban areas, the higher percentage of minority population, the more likely the area is to be a food desert. So what's in your community? So why are community gardens important? It improves the quality of life for those that participate. It helps to promote healthy eating habits. It helps to produce nutritious foods for those individuals and families. It increases physical activity of the individuals working in the gardens. It promotes self-reliance and social interaction. And it also encourages opportunities for individuals within the gardening community to have cross-cultural interactions between those members. It also helps to beautify the area. It can promote neighborhood cooperation by working together for the greater good. And it can also assist the community with donations of fresh fruits and vegetables to local food pantry or soup kitchens. So today, a large part of my job as a small farms local foods educator is to connect with businesses, organizations, and individuals to discuss options on how they can make a difference to help decrease food insecurities and food deserts within their communities. These 6 areas, farmers markets, community gardens, school gardens, food banks, mobile markets, and aggregation centers, are a few of the programs that communities should look at. But today, I'm going to be focusing specifically on community gardens. So there are different types of community gardens. So a garden is a tract of private or public land that are gardened by friends, neighbors, or groups of people. They utilize either individual or shared plots. These gardens can be located in neighborhoods, schools, public housing, and other places. There are several types of community gardens that could be incorporated, either through individual, organizational, or citywide efforts. So let's start talking about some of them. First one I'll talk about briefly is the youth and garden schools. These can incorporate hands-on gardening with classroom instructions. They could be formal and informal. These efforts engage youth by showing them where their food comes from, and it can be incorporated into school lesson plans by teaching basic business principles, job and life skills, as well as environmental stewardship and sustainability. Some of the programs that have been incorporated within my communities are after-school programs working with children, initiating hydroponic systems, and working with high school kids and adults. These programs have made a difference in how the kids view food insecurities and food deserts within their specific communities and what they can do to help mitigate these issues. Community and gift gardens. The gift meaning growing Illinois food together. These are created by community members who develop and share in the work and the harvest. Food harvested is for all members in the community garden, or it can be donated to local food pantries. Specific food pantry gardens. These donations from the garden, all the food goes directly to local food banks or soup kitchens in the community. Horticultural therapy gardens. These can create that are aimed at nursing homes, hospitals, or senior citizens, prisons, and VA centers, to name a few. These gardens help to improve the memory, the socialization, and have been used by horticultural therapists for rehabilitation and healthcare issues. So, what are some of the challenges of creating a community garden? Local government and business leaders are in a unique position to help promote and support community gardens. As you've seen, community gardens can improve the health and nutrition levels of community members, improve physical activity, community engagement, and economic vitality, specifically for a neighborhood or community, and can also provide environmental benefits as well. The very first thing you need to consider is location, location, location. Is the land accessible? How much sunlight does the garden get? You need at least 6 hours of full sunlight if you're going to be growing vegetables. What's the soil quality? What is the past history of the land? Getting a soil test should be a priority once the site is determined, especially if it's being constructed in areas that may have contaminants and heavy metals, as seen in some city or urban areas. Will it be built on public or private land? Developing land use policies are important. For city property, zoning ordinances can help create community gardens and ensure their long-term viability. Adoption of policies and programs to facilitate the creation and maintenance of the garden, such as financial support, technical assistance, or education. Cities can also assist in land acquisitions for gardens and help manage the garden. If the city has vacant lots, establish and adopt a lot program where the city will work with the landowner to create an agreement for the use of the land as a garden, or allowing city staff, such as from the Parks and Recreations Department or the Public Work Department to assist in a neighborhood in starting a garden. Other considerations would be water sources. The best water source would be from a municipal water. If using well or surface water, such as springs or lakes, it would be strongly suggested that you test those waters to make sure that it is potable before using in the garden. Electricity can be optional, but basically you're going to be using electricity mostly for safety issues, especially if the garden is going to be open after dusk or accessible by the public during the evening hours. Zoning concerns are going to be an issue when starting a community garden. So no matter where you are planning it, check with your local city, county, and township regulations to see whether there are issues with developing a community garden at your chosen site. Depending on your city government structure, contacting the city manager or Parks and Recreations Department would be a good start. They can review your proposal and help start the process on developing your community garden. Other things you need to start considering are going to be animals, theft, and vandalism. No matter what you do, there's always concerns with animal intrusions into the garden area. Not only do these critters eat your crops, they can also cause crop food safety concerns should they poop in the garden. Using fencing of some kind would be required to help alleviate this concern. The other concern are individuals from the general public coming into the garden, especially if it's open to the public, and coming in and taking the fruits and vegetables that are ready to eat. When people think of, quote, community garden, unquote, it produces an image of a garden that is open to everyone. So developing a mission statement for your garden, like who will benefit from the crops grown, how will the produce be distributed, this should help you in determining the type of garden that you're going to create and who should have access to it. Who will maintain the garden? Once the garden is established, it will be important to designate a person or organization that will be responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the garden. This will include the planting, weeding, mowing, bed maintenance, sanitation issues, and other things that will keep a garden viable. Without this person or organization, the garden's not going to survive the first year. And there's nothing worse than seeing a community garden that has tall grass and weeds in the garden beds and surrounding areas. Will your garden have rules and regulations? These are created to address any concerns or questions that may arise during the growing season. It can also assist with disputes and conflict issues between garden members, discussion of membership fees, if any gardening practices. Specifically, I'm thinking of organic practices versus using pesticides in the garden, or the layout of the garden site itself. Finding resources for building and maintenance of the garden. We're going to discuss this more detail a little bit later. So community organizers, when you start beginning this process, these community organizers work with people to improve the conditions of the community and will try and enhance their quality of life. So creating a community garden requires an organizer or a person to define goals of the garden, to help people identify strengths, assets, opportunities, and challenges, organize resources, and keep track and evaluate the work. So generally, a committed organizer is going to be crucial to the success of this community garden. From my working with community gardens in my area, it's generally one or two people that are going to be your community organizers that are going to be interested in wanting to start the garden and then start reaching out to individuals. So this organizer should develop a planning committee consisting of 6 to 8 individuals that are committed to developing the garden, such as designing, developing an operational plan, obtaining resources, preparation of a garden budget, management of volunteers, etc. Designation of one person as a general garden coordinator can serve as the contact person between the planning committees and the community organizers. Elect and define a garden manager position. This person will manage the day-to-day activities in the garden, as well as have the ability to handle any problems and/or concerns that may arise. Once these 6 to 8 individuals are chosen, develop community groups to help break up the garden responsibilities. Location and design of the garden. Maps of publicly owned lands can be obtained from local city government. Other land options can be on church land, privately owned, vacant land, or underused lots throughout your community. Make sure you keep in mind a few things. What was the land used for in the past? Could there be soil contamination? Will the land be leased or donated? If it's leased, check with an attorney to determine a need for rights of access to the land or use access of the land, as well as liability issues and insurance. Public land is not always the best option. If contracts are not renewed, then the garden has no choice but to move. If it's on private land, try to obtain a contract that lasts at least 3 years. Developing operational plans, designation of garden manager, assistant managers, fees, hours of operation, volunteer work, schedule. These are the things that's going to be part of your operational plan. And developing rules and regulations. What is the mission of the garden? Who will use the garden? What criteria will be used to choose? Will the garden have employees or member volunteers? You need to look into some of the legal ramifications on developing on public or private property. How will you handle disputes between the gardeners? Will your community garden have insurance coverage? These are all going to be parts of your rules and regulations. And sometimes it's easiest when you start developing your committee or community of 6 to 8 people. You may want to get local lawyers or attorneys or local accountants, involved in your community garden from the very beginning. They will help in the long run. Form subcommittees to address specific topics such as funding, acquisitions, partners, garden construction, communication, media staff, and an educational subcommittee, and someone to manage the volunteer schedules. These individuals can be local attorneys or accountants, as I mentioned earlier, that are willing to help promote and develop a viable garden in your community. Initiate a garden budget for site clearing, purchasing materials, soil testing, and improvement. Buildings, garden tools, seeds and plants, water bills, electric bills, if you have any, and other monetary concerns that may pop up. Management of volunteers is going to be important, though. Keeping track of what organization is going to be coming into the garden this week, or community members that want to assist in the garden during the growing season. Who will be responsible for water, fertilizing, weeding this week, and who will be responsible for next week. Volunteers will be important for a long life expectancy of your garden, and we'll discuss volunteers shortly. And lastly, the big thing is name your garden. Get a name for it so everybody knows where it's at and what it's for. Planning. What's the purpose and goal of the community garden? Is it because of poor nutrition, declining levels of physical and physiological health, unsafe or polluted environments? Community gardens can help beautify the area, can help promote neighborhood cooperation, assist community donors with fresh fruits and vegetables, especially to the local food pantries. So let's talk a little bit about demand. Is there an interest for the community garden? Just because you found a nice place to put the garden doesn't mean that the neighborhood wants the garden there. So you have to determine whether the community garden is going to fit into the neighborhood and whether the neighbors will be agreeable to have the community garden within their neighborhood. Initiate a needs assessment in the surrounding areas. Interest should come from families and individuals, not just well-meaning supporters. Have at least 10 families within the area to determine an interest. Schedule community meetings and address issues before committing resources to the project. Other things to consider when you're planning the garden is the land. Is it accessible? 6 hours of sunlight? Do you have any overhanging trees? What's the soil quality? Again, do a soil test to make sure. Urban land, suggest heavy metal testing if you're using urban land. Find out what the history of the land is. When we started a community garden in the town that I live in, they were looking at land available in our community, and they found a nice lot that had a fence around it. But unfortunately, the land itself had a business on it that handled car batteries or used car batteries, and they stored them specifically on the ground for many years, over 20 years. And so just because the land looks good and it looks like a perfect place, you need to be aware of what the history of that land is. Does the land have water accessibility? Does it have city access? It's recommended. Or surface and ground? Should it be tested? Or food safety issues, especially if you're using that river water or stream water. Municipal water is fine. That shouldn't be a problem. Does it have electricity? This can be optional, as I mentioned earlier. And are there any zoning concerns? So make sure you check with your local city and county and township regulations with any issues with developing at the chosen site. Specifically, you're going to be looking at parking issues and any type of underground power lines or utility lines under the ground before you start digging. On the development side, are you going to be organic or conventional? Are you going to allow pesticide sprays? If spraying pesticides, you'll need to have an individual that is trained as a pesticide applicator. Will you develop plots for community members only? Will the garden donate excess food? If so, where is it going to be donated at? Will the garden be handicapped accessible? Will there be common growing areas? How and when will harvesting be done? Who will do it? And is the garden going to be tilled or not? If you have raised beds, tilling is not going to be an option. So, that's going to be another consideration. Your bed's going to be raised, or are they going to be in the ground? And donating the produce to the food banks and soup kitchens. Who will manage those plots? If you have specific areas or specific beds that are going to go to those organizations. Who will do the harvesting, the water and spraying? And that's going to be covered when we talk about volunteers. Will you have areas within the garden for the general public to come in and view the garden? Or is it only going to be available to the garden members? Will you allow year-round gardening? This is going to depend a lot on where your garden is located. There are season extension products that you can use that can take you late into the fall and early winter. Again, it's going to determine when you decide with your rules and regulations on when the garden is going to close for the season and the cleanup issues devoted to that. One last thing you need to think about it, will kids be allowed in the garden? And it is my belief that if you're going to allow kids in the garden, they're the ones that come in and like to taste the product as they pick it from the plant. So if you're considering pesticides, this is an issue that you really need to sit down and think about and how you're going to handle that. So let's talk a little bit about sustainability. So everybody has a garden, they have the garden plans, but it's always difficult to find funding in order to keep that garden viable. What you want to be able to do is to have a garden that's going to be self-sufficient. That would be great. If the garden can make its own money in order to survive and you won't have to depend on grants, that would be great. But that's not necessarily the way it works out. So one of the first questions you'll ask as a group is, how will you sustain your project over time? Uh, so where the funding will come from for the initiation and sustainability of the garden, how will you acquire materials such as sheds and hoses, gardening tools, seeds and soil, who's going to build it, where's the material going to come from. So let's discuss a few things that you can do to obtain funding. So grants are a great way to get a project started, but they should not be relied on for permanent funding. This is only temporary funding. It's critical that you find the grant that fits your program. It's not a good practice to create a program that meets the parameter of the grant. It's critical that you look for grants that are a good fit for your gardening intentions and goals. In order to maximize your success, make sure that your proposal addresses a problem or it improves a situation that the funding agency that the grant is through thinks is important. Review the call for proposals when they come out to see if the objectives of the grant meet with your gardening objectives. If it's not a good fit, look for other funding sources. Some basic grant tips: have a goal. So again, have a goal for your garden. Where's it going? What is your mission? What do you want to do with that garden? Make sure that you have a set budget, and not only for the first year, for maybe the first 2 or 3 years. You need to look into the future for your garden. Make sure you define roles and responsibilities within that grant. Who's going to be responsible for what? And also with the grant specifically, keep track of the deadlines. Reports are going to be important when you start looking at grants. This is a information as far as a URL link to a site that gives you garden grants for schools, communities, and nonprofits. The listing that you have here is going to be generalized, so it may cover more than just community gardens. And because there are so many, you'll need to really sit down and read through each of those before you make a decision on which grant you're going to do. Other grants that are available outside, just from the ones that I was looking at when I was setting up this presentation, there are many of them out there. All you have to do is find a way to locate them, and that can be difficult. So what I've done, and a couple of our program coordinators in my unit in Bond, Clinton, Jefferson, Marion, and Washington counties here in Illinois, we have created a community garden toolkit. So there's some additional information for grants and funding that could be found in this toolkit. It was created by myself and the Ag and Natural Resource Program coordinators. This will also encompass some additional information not presented in this webinar. If you're from an organization outside of Extension, it may benefit you to contact your local Extension office to see if they are able to assist in the planning and implementation phases of your garden. Either way, this toolkit will help you get started. All right, volunteers. Your volunteers are the most crucial element in sustaining a community food project. Without their continued support and hard work, a project will not survive for very long. Make sure you treat those volunteers like the assets that they are. But how do you find these volunteers? Well, there are several areas that you can look. First off, you want to find your champions. Okay? You want to find 3 to 5 individuals that are dedicated to the project and are in it for the long haul. And then you're going to have your helpers. Your helpers are going to be about 10 to 20 individuals who may or may not be champions or financial supporters, but they are always there to help when needed. These could include your government officials, local organizations, and businesses. And then you're going to have your financial supporters or volunteers. Funding is critical, and so are people in the community willing to provide funding in both dollars and in-kind donations. Local news media and even social media folks can have a huge impact if they are interested in sharing information about the project, as well as fundraising events. technical assistant volunteers. These are the local lawyers to assist with not-for-profit status, if that's where you want to go with your garden. Accountants to assist with budget, building, social media individuals, all those types of technical assistance. Youth groups are an excellent way. These are, not only are you tapping into the younger generation to get into the gardening and agriculture, but you're training the next generation of leaders and farmers within your community. With our community garden in Mount Vernon, initial technical advisors with the University of Illinois Extension's Ag and Natural Resource Program coordinators, small farms local food educator, master gardeners, and others in the community. Fundraising events. So this is going to be your ongoing financial support. So in addition to raising the funds necessary for continued community food project operations, fundraising events like this Garden to Table event bring community members together for a good cause. The key to having a successful nonprofit fundraising event is by encouraging engagement while still keeping it fun. These types of events will help bring in ongoing financial support for your project. I've found that people want to become involved, even if it's not directly with the planning or the development committee, or helping to build the raised beds or dig the soil or plant the plants for the garden. So these fundraising events, this is for our Mount Vernon Community Garden. We had a dinner event at a local restaurant, and we also had a silent auction that went along with it. And so the money that was raised for this went directly to the community garden for initial setup. Other ideas for ongoing financial support, you can set up 50-50 raffles, but if you're going to do that, make sure you check with your local and state laws before starting. Bake sales, local restaurant dinners, as we did, maybe develop some t-shirt sales or garden bag sales with the garden logo on it. In-kind donations, don't forget about those. These are a kind of charitable giving in which, instead of giving money to buy needed goods and services, these goods and services themselves are given. Everything from water installations, tools, items for silent auctions, and t-shirts can come from various local businesses and cost you nothing. The example that you see on the left is from our silent auction. One of our local businesses here in Mount Vernon donated some material and information to the garden, and that went to the silent auction. The picture on the right is a picture of a water spigot. And I put that in there because we had a local water company that did installation of water sources that actually donated his time and materials to establish a water system for our community garden in our local park area. And so that was a huge, huge benefit for our garden. And it was well needed. It was very much needed. And that is what we consider an in-kind donation. Other examples can be computers or softwares, donation of construction materials, seeds for the community garden. Those are in-kind donations. Services like a restaurant dinner, restaurant space for that, maybe photocopy and mail services, anything expertise like legal, tax, or business advice, that's all in-kind donations. Marketing and website development for your project, those are all considered in-kind donations, the free stuff, right? But if you're going to start getting these in-kind donations, make sure you thank them. That's going to be the important thing. Crowdfunding is another great way to test community support for the project while raising the funds you need in order to get started. So first thing you want to do is ask yourself when you're starting a crowdfunding or social media event is to ask yourself, why should I contribute? If you can answer that question easily and satisfactorily, then your crowdfunding should work out. Basically, for crowdfunding, you want to start with about collecting hopefully about $3,000. That's a good level to start at. The best campaigns that you see for crowdfunding, it will only last about 20 to 40 days. You could also find local matching opportunities. So it can be more than just an online campaign. You can also reach out to your local businesses and organizations and to see if they're willing to match any of the funding that you have received from your online campaign. Some sponsored rewards, you can have that. So if somebody gives you 1,500, let's say, you can have them name a room in a cafe, or $100 to name a menu item, or spending on your local business. Development of one-of-a-kind t-shirts or totes, as I mentioned earlier. That's another way to bring in some of this donation. You donate $50, we can give you a one-of-a-kind t-shirt or a tote specific for this garden. And the big thing about this is who's going to handle the day-to-day tasks. You need to have someone that's going to be available on a regular basis to be able to follow the crowdfunding, make sure that it gets the support that it needs in order for it to continue. The last thing with crowdfunding is make sure that you have videos available. People always like to see what's happening in the garden. So from maybe the time that you start the digging process to the time that the beds are being built, to moving the beds to the garden area, to filling the beds, laying the mulch, planting the seeds, and harvesting the produce. All of these are going to be important, but the crowdfunding is basically how is that garden getting started and where's their money going to go to? One last thing to think about for your community garden is developing educational programs. Educational programming is an important component when thinking about developing your garden. It's one thing to set up the garden and have all the hardware in place, such as the water, compost, hoses, boxes, all that. But it's just as important to make sure your community garden bed holders have the basics on how to garden. From what I've found in working with gardens in my area is that those that want to plant in a community garden are beginning gardeners and are not only looking to grow fresh fruits and vegetables for their families, but are also looking for assistance on how to get started. Educational programs can range from beginning gardeners' 6-week program to a more advanced techniques such as developing and maintaining a compost pile, season extension techniques, which allows them to plant early spring or late fall, or demonstration gardens, which allow other gardeners to learn from each other. So we've covered a lot of information in a short period of time. So just how do you get started in all this? Well, let me give you a little bit of background information here. So finding like-minded individuals to help with the planning and implementation, we talked about that. You should be available to assist with the day-to-day running of the project manager, supervisor, publicity, and all of that. Development of the steering committee, we talked about that, consisting of 6 to 8 individuals that are going to help with the budgets, management, workers, and all that. You might want to designate one person as the general coordinator, as we talked about. But how are you going to get these individuals? So who should be involved in your planning and implementation phase? You're going to be looking for local elected leaders. You're going to be looking for farmers or groups interested in sustainable farming, food banks and anti-hunger advocates, public health workers and nutritionalists, community advocates, parks and recreations department and or city managers, gardening organizations, community businesses, and community members. The timeline from beginning planning phase to planting can vary depending on the committee's decision. I've had some small community gardens begin in January and plant their first seed by June of the same year. Some larger or more sophisticated gardens may take more time. The community garden that was created in Mount Vernon began March of 2016 when the community and city individuals reached out to Extension to begin talks on the community garden. It took us about a year to determine interest from the community members, finding the location for the garden, getting city approvals for the land use, how many beds are going to be installed, funding materials, especially for the raised beds, the woods, the screw, the wood itself, soil and compost, gardening tools, hoses, fencing, all that. And then from there, we needed volunteers to assist in cutting and assembling the raised beds, moving the beds from the storage area to the garden area, tractor usage to assist with laying the mulch, volunteers to place the bed, fill the beds with soil. All this can take time based on the number of volunteers you have and how big the garden is. In April of 2017, the first seed was planted. We had 16 beds total for the first year. Garden beds were assigned to community members that signed up for them. It was a donation garden, so food that was not used by the bed owner went to our local food pantries. We also had donation beds assigned, so all food produced in those beds went directly to the food pantries. In November of 2017, we had donated 355 pounds of fresh produce to local residents within the neighborhood that could not garden because of health issues, and to the local food pantries. Now, this poundage was over and above the produce picked by the community garden members for their individual families. So overall, the garden itself produced more than 350 pounds of produce. So you have the planning and implementation, but you also need to start looking at the impact and evaluating your community garden. It's important to evaluate whether it met the mission and expectations that were set during the implementation phase. Did it meet stated objectives? If you have a grant, you will need to do assessments and measure impacts based on what the proposal required. Generally, you're going to have monthly, bi-monthly, or yearly reports associated with that. Outcome measures should be measurable and achievable. This is where you can gauge whether the project is having the intended effect on the community. It can be short-term or long-term. For example, were new skills learned by community members to become more self-sufficient? Or was there an increased consumer demand for locally grown produce? Other measurable outputs that you're going to have is the number of families that benefited from the garden itself. If the community garden donates food, the number of pounds produced of produce that was donated throughout the year, the number of local growers that were able to deliver, number of volunteers and hours worked, and how many people attended the educational classes that were offered. All these impact values can be used the next year to help gain financial support for the garden, such as sponsors and/or city and community support. And the last thing you're going to think about is that you're going to remember to celebrate, right? You spent a lot of time and energy getting this garden established and going. It's going to be important that you reach out to the community and get them involved in celebrating their successes as well. In October of 2017, we had a Halloween party for the community. It was open up to the whole city, but the community members is what we really tried to focus on. We had food and games. There was a costume. Kids brought in or wore their Halloween costumes that day. So there was a costume party. We had a place set up, as you see in the upper right-hand corner, where you could take family photo sessions. We had a local photographer that came in and donated her in-kind time to take pictures of families and give those pictures free of charge. Local news media organizations to help promote and cover the event itself. And we allowed community organizations that were involved with the garden to have a booth or table associated as well. Specifically the police and fire departments, because they were really helpful with us when we started the garden and were able to work with us as far as traffic and all. So make sure when you finish everything that you celebrate your successes. And that's all the information that I have here. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Gail. Gail, are you on?
I am now.
Okay.
That last slide, I know a lot of people went, whoa, that was so fast. But what we're going to do is this program has been recorded and it will be available in a short amount of time. And we will be sending that link to everyone on this program and who registered. In addition, you'll be able to get that toolkit and whatnot. So anyways, so part of what Lori talked about a lot, which was an amazing amount of information, and we sure do appreciate that. She talks about the rate, if you're going to do raised beds and the soil quality. So next slide, please. So you ask yourself why raised beds? Well, there were several, because one is, I went on a tour one time in Springfield, Illinois, to about 20 different community gardens throughout the area, and restaurant had gardens and things. And one of the gardens was going to be at a big old glass plant. I guess they used to make like mason jars. Well, as it turned out, they wanted to put raised beds in because they were concerned about the soil, and they had the soil tested, and it turned out to be really great soil and fine. But unlike Lori's example, where they had those batteries, even raised beds was probably a concern. So anyways, you want to might say, why raised beds at all? Because a lot of us were raised growing gardens and doing old fashioned rows, etc. But when you're working with the community and with groups and defining areas for people to garden, you're going to find that the raised beds really define the planting area. So as you can see, this was a school garden. This was a teaching garden. All the produce at this garden stayed within the school, and the students consume that in their own kitchens back at their what they call cottages. But they're strawing this in, and of course they're new gardens themselves, so they're really strawing these in to keep the weeds down and hold the moisture in. But these kids really, until these plants get a little larger, really don't have any idea where to stand and walk. And so that's one, it defines your space. It also improves drainage. Anytime you have poor drainage, you're going to want to raise above the grade of the soil, and you're going to have really great drainage. And so you can even garden, even when it's too wet to garden in normal traditional, especially early spring if you want to till the garden. So you can get into that garden very, very early and start some very early crops. The beds are much easier for people who have any kind of mobility issues at all. And even the kids enjoy not having to go bend all the way down to the ground. So it really becomes very well. And since you're putting soil in and you're keeping it above the ground, it does often produce less weeds. Next slide, please. So drainage is a really big deal. So this garden again this is a garden that was in Hoyleton, Illinois, at a special school. This garden, even though it was flat, it really wasn't. It hadn't been used for anything other than a home site. So it had really at one time. So it had really great soil, but the drainage was actually very poor. And the first year and a half, 2 years, we did garden straight in the soil, and there were 2 very wet years back to back, and we could not get in this garden, even if we didn't want to till, even if we thought we just plant right, in the soil without any working the soil, because it was so wet. And so we didn't get our crops in till sometime in June. But I might say this garden is a 30 by 70 garden, and it has consistently produced close to 3,000 pounds. So you will get the production out of the garden, but you sometimes will lose a whole season. So it was so wet that even when it dried out enough to work in some of the beds, you can see in this bottom picture, we got desperate. So I took topsoil bags and I slits, just took a knife and put some slits in the bottom so to have good drainage, flipped it over, planted my watermelon seeds right in that bag. That made my instant raised bed garden. But kids are anxious to garden, and this is a disappointment, especially if a garden is going to have scheduled work days. It would turn out that the scheduled work days were the day we got the rain. So this was a good way for us to go. So next slide, please, Lori. So raised beds. So this is before you can see we're in the process of getting our fence up and some things of that nature. We planted traditional rows. We used some weed barrier in some cases, a lot of straw to keep the weeds down. But, and we did get really good production, but you can see it's a little messier. It's a little hard, to decide. And if you were dividing this out for community members, you'd have to have some system to show whose area is whose, if you will. The thing about raised beds, as we'll look at, is raised beds can be planted much more intensely. Plants can be planted closer together. You can regulate the water very easily, and you have a really good way of doing plant succession. So for example, if you get in that garden in late February, March, and you're planting your peas and your spinach, as soon as those are done, you already have a plan on paper to know that you're going to put in your next season's crop, perhaps beans. And you see the bamboo poles here? Don't forget about vertical gardening. So that really helps too. So next slide, Lori. So remember, this is our before slide, and here's after. So this took us a couple years to obtain this many raised beds. We put them in at a little bit at a time. We did have a really great resource for volunteers. not only did we have our master gardeners work with us, but we had a school that came out a couple years in a row, and they helped with our fence and our shed and building these gardens. But you can see it's very easy to walk in. You could mulch these areas in between, but once they get padded down and walk, that even after a rainy day, very accessible to these gardens. And if these are 4x8, and it's amazing how much food you can grow in a 4x8 area, especially if you plant it closer and you plan when a bean crop is done, you know, the day you pull those beans, you can put something new in, and you have lots and lots of things to look for. So we've grown everything from potatoes to peanuts, and there isn't a crop you can't grow in a raised bed. And you can guarantee the soil's going to be good. So that's nice. These middle beds, just to reference, are a little skinnier than the others, and they're kind of just shared gardens. One was all edible flowers and floral, just to have some color in the garden, and one was an herb garden. So it had, you know, a dozen or more varieties of different herbs. Next slide. So this is later in the season. These are the raised beds you saw. Obviously they fill and flourish. So very, very nice. But here's a rainy day and people are coming out to see the garden, and it's completely accessible. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Rick, and he's going to help us out with some of the ideas for this garden. So, and he'll interject a few of his own thoughts on this, but this is a bed design that we use at several of the gardens. And so that therefore we're sharing that idea for you today. So Rick, it's up to you to start talking.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I know, very well, thank you.
All right. Okay. Yeah, when it builds, I mean, you can use your own, so it depends on what kind of materials you have, but the 2x6s work pretty well. And if you get, like you're building a 4x8 bed, which is what these were, you could get like 3/16. You can buy your boards in like 16-foot lengths and have them cut. And the nice thing about it is you can, like, they show some of these were built on site, but you can actually pre-cut the lumber and save yourself a lot of trouble and make it a lot easier to haul when you get there. They recommend treated lumber. I helped my neighbor one time, and he used cedar, which worked really well, except it doesn't last very long. And if you wanted to use something like cypress, it'll last a long time, but it'll cost you to, if you can even find the stuff. But so the treated works well. Cordless tools, best idea they've ever come up with. And like I say, extra batteries is a good idea. When you use deck screws, if you get the kind, they've got several different kinds, just make sure that whatever style you get, they have star heads, Phillips heads, square heads, that you have the right bit for it. You may even want to have some extra bits with you because they can break or lose them. That happens. And these, they anchored the corners, so you need a shovel or a tile spade to dig the holes for the corner posts. But post hole digger works too. They always say gloves and goggles because you're going to be using equipment, and you don't really want to get a splinter from treated lumber. It's had them, and they're even less pleasant than a regular thing. And when you go to cut these up, it says, make sure they're 8 foot. One of the things you can do when you're doing them is, you say you cut 1 8-footer because you're going to lose a little for the saw cut. So, and what I've done before, you can measure 4 different pieces and they'll come up 4 different lengths. So I just cut the first one and then use it as a template for the others, so they all wind up being the same. And you know, what they did is put the 4x4 inch pieces in the corners, and which does two things for it. It's anchors it in the ground so it doesn't move. But the other thing it does is that you got a square piece that you can work with. It helps with when you're putting it together, you don't wind up with a bunch of trapezoids or parallelograms that way. And you know, you can, you know, have a square with you, you know, but you're making dirt corrals, so it's, I mean, if they're not exactly perfect, it's not really gonna hurt anything. And it says use 6 screws per corner, 24 per bed. That just lets you know how many you need to buy ahead of time. If I could try to have the next slide, please. Okay. And yeah, it's good to have help. Actually, if you can pre-cut the wood, that saves you, you know, setup and time when you get there. But you know, I got my neighbor, he said when he was in the wood shop class learning, they told him if you could build a square box, you can build anything. So anyway, you get better the more you do. So next slide. Okay, and it's the same deal. They you know, you can see how the corners there where the lines are and where the screws go. It's pretty self-explanatory, and you can see how that 4x4 works really well for squaring the boxes up for you. And next slide, please. And when it comes to putting them where you want them, you know, kind of place it out. You can use, you know, a chalk line. You can use what we've done before too. Is, I mean, you can, if you're going to set one, you get it where you want it, and then you just use another board to, you know, between the two, you know, from side to side, so you get them all squared up in a tape measure, and you set it in. And what they've done is they've dug small holes in there to do it. And you know, that's, we build them without the anything in the ground, and once you fill them with dirt, they're pretty much there until you decide you want to move them later. You know, and you know, kind of think about how you're doing it. You know, you give yourself enough space between them or whatever, so that you know, when you're hauling, you know, one thing, if you get dirt in bulk, you don't want to have, you'll need a wheelbarrow. You just need to give yourself room to get in there with the wheelbarrow so you can dump your dirt in. But other than that, you should be say pretty easy. You're just filling up a box with dirt. Next slide, please. Okay. And yep, well, they talk about the wood, but yeah, there's somebody using it. Like I say, we've built them with different kinds. They started out using railroad ties, but you got all the creosote and stuff like that, and they got concerned with the that creosote or whatever was in the railroad ties leaching into your dirt, which is the whole idea of putting clean the raised bed in the first place, is so you've got, you know, good dirt that won't affect your produce. So but yeah, if you can, you know, treated works the best, but if you can, you know, find, you know, somebody's got some leftover construction stuff or whatever, you can do whatever. And like this one, they built it out of regular untreated and stained it. You could hit it with polyurethane. You could, you know, anything that will seal the wood will make it last longer. So anyway, next slide, please. And then you see how they're installing them. It's, you know, not a one-person job. You got to, and you can see where they've put a string out there to line up where they want everything to be, and they've dug the holes with a tile spade there, and then they drop everything down, you know, and it depends on how particular you are on how level you get these things, because you're going to be dealing with the ground, but you can do whatever you need. After a season, they're not going to be level anymore anyway. So you make it to where you're happy with it, and the plants will be happy too. Next slide, please. Okay. Yeah, and that's the thing about it is if you've got young people with you, or just, you know, older folks that aren't used to it, they really like the idea of being able to participate in doing what you can do. It now, it takes a little longer time sometimes to do it that way, but then, you know, it's worked for some doctors one time. They said when they're learning to do surgery, they said they would say, see one, do one, teach one. And that's kind of how this would work. Once you show somebody how to do it, then they're going to show somebody else, and then they'll show somebody else. And, you know, and that's the whole idea, because it's not something you need to do all by yourself, because that's the whole idea of a community garden. Next slide, please. And here's one that Gail said that they made for somebody that needed wheelchair access, you know, so they, you know, I'm not sure what they used for a bottom in it, but, you know, you get it up above ground, and, you know, and it works well. I had a brother-in-law, and that's what, he had some health issues, and the folks built his garden up. I'm not sure exactly how they did it, but it was where he could walk up to it without having to bend over and do whatever he needed to do. Next slide, please. And yeah, and like here's where you see where they got the PVC over the garden here. Now we have done that before and put netting on it to keep the birds out and discourage the deer, but they not always that easily discouraged. One thing my neighbor has trouble with his beds is all the neighborhood cats think they're litter boxes. So sometimes just a little netting or something like that, just to make it where they want to go somewhere else, is the way to do it. And he uses wood slats on his, you know, whatever you need. Gail said she thought, you know, experience was that they might put a stringer in between the different hoops there to keep everything from, you know, more stable, keep it from wobbling around or bending. PVC is real bad about in the heat, sometimes can soften up and warp. So next slide. And then vertical gardening, done that too. I guess, you know, they used hog panels, but I mean, you can use you can run chicken wire in between, you know, whatever, because the plants, and then just growing up, and then they've got the one with the bamboo poles, which is just fine. But I turn it back to Gail. It looks like she's got the next few.
Okay, yeah, we're just gonna wrap it up. I know we're going a little over, but some garden here with this young man on the left. Earlier in Lori's presentation, you saw a garden that was using railroad ties. That is how the garden was installed initially. So when we took over as extension associates, we really strongly recommended that we recreate the garden. And so we built these type beds for them. And the hog panel, you know, when you're doing tomato plants and things like that, we grew our tomato plants right alongside this hog panel, and we put, I think, 4 on each side. And then as they grew, we just weaved them in and out. And it was very easy to harvest. And again, when you're working with children, you like to make it as easy as possible. So that was how we used those, but you could use those for other things. And those they do come in 16-foot sections, but most of your stores, your farm stores, they will cut those for you in half. So you'll have them ready to go when you get there. So the only thing, the next slide, Lori. So we're kind of wrapping up. We kind of went kind of quick through some of this. Those just instructions on how to build the beds this style are on that one slide. So when you get your slides, you'll have that information. They're very easy to build and quite inexpensive. There might be some people out there that are asking about treated lumber. They might not be asking it on the chat box, but I believe they're probably thinking about it. I do see someone says cinder blocks too. And I use cinder blocks at home because I got them from a store that went out of business, and I plant little herbs and things in the top holes. But treated lumber is not the old treated lumber. So they use a new process now. And so it is safe. If you want or are growing things for a farmer's market or going to be selling the produce and you want to use the term organic, although there's lots more rules to be able to use the word organic. But one of the ways to say it's organic in these gardens is you can line and put plastic between the treated lumber and the soil. But that you can use the new treated lumber and have a safe garden. So, you know, just the joy of kids knowing that they grew something. So this school always provides a snack, and so they have lots of tomatoes through the summer. So it's just fun to see the success. Lori says celebrate the success, and this is one of them. And then Lori, next slide, please. So it always takes a team to get a garden started. And so as an extension employee, we like to reach out to the community. The woman on the right is Janet Klee, and she is our master gardener that contacted the school initially. She had been working with them as a volunteer on other aspects throughout the years. And they had this big piece of property, and that is her sister. Her sister joined us when she was 93. She worked us under the ground. She was amazing. Unfortunately, we've lost her, but there's a treasure. But it always takes someone to plant the seed. And these two ladies were so into working in this garden. So I really wanted to just pay tribute to them to get us going on that garden. So it took about 3 years to have it completely fenced and all raised beds and whatnot. And this is the 6th year. Of course, it's a little sloppy this year because they didn't have near the volunteers they would have liked to because of the COVID restrictions. But last slide, Lori. So we just want to thank you. Have fun in your garden. Eat 5 a day. Of course, extension, we're always, or more a day, 5 or more, 5 to 9. We always try to have fun in the garden and make gardening fun for the youth. And even the neighbors, there's houses all around this garden, and they enjoy that we maintain the garden and we're out there having a good time, and at the same time producing lots of good healthy food for these kids. You know, their previous menu, unfortunately, was probably very institutionalized food, the big cans of green beans, you know, and things of that nature. They would eat dirt. Lori said about doing it organic or not organic. The kids in this garden would eat even broccoli that went to seed and had soil on it. I mean, they were so hungry for fresh vegetables. It's really exciting to see and be part of that. So I hope that you all have success with your gardens. And if anyone has any questions, I have been monitoring the chat box and haven't seen any new questions come up. But if anybody wants to ask a question or open up your microphone, speak your question if you want. Lori's still on, myself and Rick. And thank you very much for attending and staying a little extra to get a little extra information.
Okay. Yep. If anybody has any questions, feel free.
Sure, I have a question.
Sure.
My name is Daly. I'm in the Chicago area. I was wondering, is starting a garden of fruit trees? I mean, because, you know, trees would take a lot longer than, you know, a season of vegetables. Would you go along the same process to start something like that?
for a community garden, you can have both fruits and vegetables. I've seen several gardens that have apple trees and peach trees, that small berry bushes as well. So don't forget your strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, things like that. The thing with these fruit trees and fruit gardens and orchards is that it takes more time, and it's very difficult to raise fruit trees like apples and peaches organically. So because we have a humid environment, it can get hot, and a lot of the diseases can be very prevalent depending on the area that you're at. But it is possible to start growing fruits in a community environment as well as the fruit trees. Just remember that if you're going to do that, it's not going to be 100% organic. And if you're going to spray the pesticides, make sure that your community members know when you're going to spray and when they can and cannot enter the garden area because of that. But that is doable, yes.
So we did grow quite a few fruits in our garden, the strawberries, and along the fence, we took advantage of that space with blackberries. Fruit trees are wonderful. They take up a ton of space, and they really are high maintenance. And like Lori said, very difficult to do organically. So there's a lot of issues with that sometimes. We do have another question in the chat box, and I'll make a statement on it, and then Lori might want to also do. But somebody asked, how do you get more people in the community involved? Really, you might want to have a strategic meeting, maybe at your town library, or if you have a town meeting hall area, to just introduce community gardens to the community. Say, hey, we'd like to start one, and try to get people to come to learn about community gardens. And then you might be able to start pulling your steering committee from that, because you may be a person of one at this point, but after you have that informational meeting, and maybe work with your local extension offices, they probably can come out and help with a program a little bit about it and how much impact you can have in your community. But that's one way. The newspaper articles and things work fine, but you might want to get all those people in one room to educate them on what the plan is, and do a little cheerleading session.
And when I initially mentioned that you were doing the implementation and the planning of the garden, I talked a little bit about needs assessments. And a needs assessment is asking a few questions and submitting them to the neighborhood where the garden's going in. And that needs assessment is going to introduce you to the neighborhood, number one, especially if you go door to door to deliver them, or you make an effort to contact them in a community center, or contact the community members that are most prevalent in that neighborhood, and talk to them directly. You'll get a lot of volunteers from the neighborhood if you reach out to them specifically. So that's another way of being able to get some good volunteers for your garden initially. As the garden progresses and it starts to grow, I think you'll see more community members that want to become involved, not only in planting their own beds, but also becoming involved with the garden because it's something new and exciting and it's making a difference in your neighborhood.
Great. We also have another answer, just to make sure people understand how big of an opportunity this can be. Alexander Woods says to add ton to that answer, if you're looking to build a fruit tree orchard, she would integrate other perennials and annuals as a food forest style. So obviously, if you have good plant knowledge, you can introduce different types of gardening, methods of gardening.
Okay. Any other questions, Gail?
Not anymore in the chat box. And anybody else? Last call here for you today. Lori is available. She's got her contact information on the screen. Myself also, if you've seen anything, and Rick is here. If you need any additional assistance from any one of us, we would be glad to reach out to you and assist you, or find somebody locally if you guys are up in the Chicago area. You know, when we talk about food deserts, you guys are getting into some pretty hefty area up in that way to be able to really add to your community. So if you need any assistance, by all means, give us a call and we'll work with you.
Yep, or your local extension office. Thank you
Right.
everyone for joining us today. We appreciate it. Happy gardening.
All right. Thank you, Lori, and thank you, Rick, and take care of everyone.